Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History. I'm Mr. Rosenkeaf. Let's continue on with our Reconstruction notes, and some of this, if you're in fourth period, this is going to be just a little bit of review because seventh period didn't get quite as far as you guys did yesterday. So we're gonna backtrack just a little bit for them. So if you're in fourth period, just bear with us here. So the 14th Amendment, which I mentioned yesterday when we talked about the Black Codes and the response to the Black Codes, the 14th Amendment says that equal rights under the law are there if you are born in the United States, except, and I missed that, except if you are a Native American. I don't think it actually says that. It just doesn't mention them. Native Americans were not considered citizens until early part of the 20th century, I believe. So what this was trying to do was prevent former Confederate office holders from actually holding office in the U.S. government. And it was also attempting to say that if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen, and that was going to apply to the newly freed former slaves. So Congress could make exceptions to the Confederate officeholder thing with a 2/3 vote, and they did that occasionally. But yeah, so that's ratified in 1868, and the hope was that was going to fix all of the issues. Well, it really is not going to, unfortunately. So under congressional Reconstruction, so remember that Congress now has taken over Reconstruction. They basically told Andrew Johnson to go take a flying leap. And they're taking over. And under congressional Reconstruction, the South is divided into 5 military districts that you can see there on your screens, or on the big screen, or whatever's happening here. So Virginia's a district, the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, and Arkansas are a district, and then Texas and Louisiana are a district. That's a big district. Wow. So that's how that was divided up. Note that Tennessee, which was Andrew Johnson's home state, even though it had seceded, it is not a part of any of the districts. All right, so under congressional Reconstruction, again, South divided into 5 military districts. All of the southern states had to have brand new constitutions, because up to this point, what they'd been doing was essentially brushing off their old constitutions, getting rid of the word slavery, and they just put them back in force. So the new constitutions had to include voting rights for, oh wow, a lot of typos on this, for all qualified male voters, including blacks, including African Americans, temporarily barred Confederate supporters from voting. So a lot of white Southerners during Reconstruction actually lost their right to vote, at least temporarily. Required the Southern states to guarantee equal rights, and required ratification of the 14th Amendment. So the other thing that's going to happen as Congress takes over is Johnson, of course, is going to try and get his power back. And one of the ways he's going to do that is he's going to try and get rid of the Secretary of War, a guy named Edwin Stanton. If you've ever seen the movie The Conspirator, Stanton is a main character in that during the trial of the people that supposedly conspired to kill Abraham Lincoln, played by Kevin Kline, the famous actor. But Stanton was very much a hero amongst the radical Republicans. They felt, had been a very key force in winning the Civil War, and was continuing to be a key force, even though he was actually quite ill during all of this. But anyway, Johnson attempts to fire him. And Congress passes, as a result of that, something called the Tenure in Office Act, saying that only Congress could get rid of cabinet officials once they've been appointed. The they passed this, and I tried to apply it retroactively to the firing of Stanton, or actually, I think they had just passed it, and then Johnson tried to violate it. In any case, this is why they impeach him. So Congress, the House impeaches Stanton. So how impeachment works is the House brings the charges, and then the Senate is the jury in the trial. When it's a president, the trial is presided over by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And Johnson, when it's all said and done, Johnson is going to escape conviction by one vote. Had one senator changed his vote, and they were all his back then, Johnson would have been removed from office. As it stands, he was allowed to continue as president. He is not going to be nominated, obviously, by the Republicans the next go around, and the Democrats also think he's kind of a weasel. So he is not nominated by any party. Now, what is going to happen is Tennessee will send him back to the Senate as a Democrat, and he'll actually die before he can. I think he's not even seated, or if he is, it's within a few days. He passes away very shortly thereafter. This is a lovely artist rendering of Johnson's impeachment. The senators sitting as a jury and lots of members of the House. And then this is, they sold tickets to the impeachment, and so this was one of the tickets to the impeachment. I think this is a picture from the Andrew Johnson historical site. All right, the 15th Amendment. So the 14th was not doing everything that Congress, that the radical Republicans had anticipated that it would do. One of the things that was happening is that the voting, the registrar of voters in the southern states were still the old Confederate registrar of voters, and they were refusing to process applications to become voters from former slaves. And they were saying that, well, the Constitution says you have to have been a citizen for, I think it's 14 years. And they were saying that, to the newly freed slaves, you don't qualify under that. You've only been a citizen since 1865 or even 1868. And so you don't qualify as a voter. Even though they had been born here, they'd been living here, they'd been enslaved up to that point. So Congress and then the states, the northern states in particular, are going to ram through the 15th Amendment. No person shall be denied the right to vote by the United States or any state on account of race, color, and here's the important part for the former slaves, previous status of servitude. So what they're saying is that essentially the former slaves were citizens all along. They just didn't get to exercise their citizenship until now, essentially. So this is going to lead to huge numbers of African Americans voting, and actually a fair number of elected officials, from the local level to the state level. You have even governors, like the first black governor was a guy by the name of Pinckney B.S. Pinchback. Such a great name. And he was the governor of Louisiana. He will also go on to be a U.S. representative. And you have a guy by the name of Hiram Revels, who will become the first black senator from the state of Mississippi. It's actually the seat that had previously been held by Jefferson Davis. And there's some wonderful cartoons that I don't have in this presentation, but some wonderful cartoons of like Jefferson Davis as Iago in the Othello story, and hanging around the Capitol, going, "Oh, his man's in my seat," and blah, blah, blah. It's great cartoons, absolutely great cartoons. But here's another cartoon of just African Americans exercising their right to vote. And notice the different. I mean, the first guy is probably a laborer. The second guy maybe a businessman. The third guy is a soldier. So I mean, there was a huge spread of what these folks were doing. And here is a very famous Currier and Ives lithograph of the first black senator and representatives, all in one picture. Revels, Hiram Revels, the senator, is the guy on the far left seated. He will only serve in the Senate for a couple of years. He will end up as president of a university back in, I think, Mississippi. And then the rest of the. So I mean, when we talk about African Americans serving in Congress, and you'll oftentimes hear that it's the first since Reconstruction or the third since Reconstruction, because during Reconstruction there was actually a fair number of African Americans in Congress, and then that will end at the end of Reconstruction until we get to 50s or 60s. And here's a lovely artist celebration of the 15th Amendment. I apologize, it's a little pixelated. Some of these are the best copy of this stuff I could find. Okay, so Republicans are really going to take over the South after the 15th Amendment because the former Confederate supporters are going to largely lose their right to vote during that time. So Republicans are going to really take over the South due to the fact that the former slaves, formerly enslaved population, they are largely Republican. They're really not voting Democrat at this point. Those sides, by the way, will end up shifting during 1930s, 1920s, I should say, with FDR. But anyway, the formerly enslaved population, they're not voting Democrat, they're voting Republican. And then you do have a population of folks from the North that are going to come to the South. Some of them are coming to legitimately try and help the transition process. Some of them are coming to find a new place to live. Some of them are legitimately just trying to make money. And that's sort of the very, from the white Southern perspective, that's what a real carpetbagger is. So carpetbaggers are Northern Republicans who moved to the South following the war, and they get the reputation of being out just for themselves, even though a lot of these folks were legitimately trying to just aid in the transition, knowing that they needed smart people down there, and so they would go down and try and assist. And these people are vilified by white Southerners. The carpetbaggers are not okay. Nowadays, carpetbagging and carpetbaggers are used to refer to like political candidates who will move to a location to run for office. Hillary Clinton, when she ran for Senate in the year 2000, she had never lived in New York State prior to when she was considering running for Senate in New York. She bought a house and proceeded to go and travel around the state listening and whatnot. But she was accused of being a carpetbagger. I have heard that label attached to various Montana politicians who were not born here, although that is proving to be less and less of a qualification every election. As more and more people come to Montana from out of state, that electorate is more okay with electing someone that was, not born and raised here in Montana. The other term to be familiar with is scalawag, and that was a derogatory term for white Southern Republicans. If you were a white person and you supported the Republican Party in the South at that time, then you were called a scalawag. Again, that has very much shifted since this time. The only time I hear scalawag now is in like pirate movies. I haven't heard it as a political thing in quite some time. I don't know if it's now maybe used to refer to white Southern Democrats, but I haven't heard that. So I would assume not. And this is a caricature of the carpetbagger. The story is that they were so keen on going to the South that they gathered all of their personal items up in a carpet, which think a rug basically, and threw it over their shoulder, and they're coming down. Notice that it looks like Abraham Lincoln kind of top hat, the beard, the whole bit. Although that was very much the style at the time too. Okay, so again, it was the African Americans and the carpetbaggers largely had a lot of political power in the South during Reconstruction, at least during the middle part. But for this newly freed population, they didn't have a lot of money to try and purchase land of their own. Most of the land that was given by the Union Army had been taken back, and there was really an economic reorganization of the South that was taking place. The problem was that there was all this land, and it needed to be worked, or else the South was not going to be able to make money. And finding qualified labor could be difficult because almost anything paid better than farm labor. If you went to work for the railroad, you got $2 a day. It was 50 cents a day to work in the fields, typically, on average. And if you were a woman, you could make as little as 6 cents a day working in the fields. So what ended up kind of happening here is that this formerly enslaved population, they had the knowledge to work the land, but a lot of them did not want to work just for anybody. They wanted to have a sense that they were working for themselves because they felt that was the only way really to get ahead. So there was the creation of this, and this is like a mirage of an opportunity. And it's called sharecropping. And what it was the landowner, so the former the plantation owner basically, would hire a farmer or several farmers to work portions of their land. They would divide their land into individual portions, and they would hire a farmer, typically a black farmer, to work there. And there would be housing for them, and what they were promised was usually a portion, a share of the harvest that they could then sell for themselves. The issue was that the share of the harvest that they got was so minuscule that it really usually only maybe covered their bills for the previous year, and then they were kind of in debt to the plantation owner to get going again for the next year. Lots of abuse in this system. Sharecroppers could be fined if they were not working the land on a given day. Oftentimes they were evicted they would bring in the harvest and prepare to split it up with the landowner, and the landowner would say, "Get out of here," and keep the entire harvest for themselves. Many of them just ended up in this cycle of debt. The landowner would charge rent to the sharecropper to live on the land, and what they made from what they brought in didn't cover that debt necessarily, or it covered it just enough that then they were into debt for the next year. There was a cycle of debt that was a part of this that was just not, it was not a great system, and that system is actually going to last into the 20th century. And here's just a picture of folks going to work in the fields in the South. And then the other, oh, here's another one. The other system that existed was tenant farming. And tenant farming was like a step above sharecropping, certainly in the socioeconomic hierarchy of the South. So basically, they had recreated slavery, just the slaves were the sharecroppers, essentially. And the next rung up, what had been occupied as the sort of poor whites, was now at least kind of open to the formerly enslaved population, but you had to have some money to get going, and for the most part, that's going to keep most African Americans out of this. But you will see some black tenant farmers. But tenant farming was, you were actually renting the land. You had some control over the land. With sharecropping, you basically had to plant whatever the plantation owner told you to plant. With tenant farming, you did have some choices. Now, for the most part, you're growing cotton. That's just what the South could sell. That was just what it was. But you did have some control, and you had a higher social standing. Tenant farmers could own your actual farm property, your plows, your rakes, etc., mules, and they were really their own bosses. They could be black or white, but most, at least in the beginning, were white. Mules. So lots of changes happening in the South. The emphasis, again, was on cash crops, things that could be sold. Cotton production will actually outpace what the pre-war levels were. And the South was not growing as much of its food. They were having to import quite a bit of food. And again, this cycle of debt, the profits for this year were used to pay off last year's bills, and then you were already into debt for the next year, and this cycle just perpetuated. Only about 5% of black families actually owned land in the South during this time, and even after, it's going to get even harder for land ownership to happen. And you're going to have merchants and stores spring up, just as they did in the West, to supply goods to these populations. A lot of these stores sold these goods on credit to the poor farmers, and again, cycle of debt. So they would allow these farmers to have like seed on credit, and then the profits from the previous year would be used to pay off that seed bill, and then, oh wait, I don't have enough money to buy seed this year, so here I'm going to take out more credit to get more seed, and see how it works. Just ends up as a cycle of debt, and it's very hard to break those cycles. So also, southern cities are going to need to be rebuilt, as we saw in the beginning of this. So you're going to have cities like Atlanta that will be rebuilt and will slowly grow into becoming a huge southern center. Nowadays, Atlanta is, I believe, the biggest city in the South, even though at the time it was not the biggest city in the South. But you see southern railroads, 40% increase in the amount of track, and you see the rise of cities like Richmond, Nashville, Memphis, Louisville, Little Rock, Montgomery, Charlotte, Dallas, Houston, Fort Worth, and of course Atlanta, that will become major population centers in the 20th and now 21st century. And that all starts during Reconstruction. Those cities start to grow as cities have more emphasis now in the South, because that's where economic development really happens. Because you start to see some industry developing. Not a huge amount, but it's starting during Reconstruction. Early stage processing, they're not really producing finished goods, but they're taking the cotton that is produced and making it into thread, making it into fabric, and then sending it to the north to be produced into garments. Cotton mills will spring up again. The production in South Carolina goes from about $713,000 in 1860 to over $3 million by 1880. So pretty big increase and that's just South Carolina. The bigger profits again were had by the northern factories that would make that thread and that fabric into finished goods, but still this was at least adding some level of economic development to the South and industry to the South. And this is a photograph, a very grainy photograph of one of those South Carolina mills. You had the investment in infrastructure, trying to rebuild roads, other public property services. Federal government had provided some money for the rebuilding, but the states did have to allocate more, and so this meant very heavy taxes levied by the states. And this angered a lot of white Southerners who were paying a lot of the taxes, but also not being allowed to vote. And what they saw too was, as a lot of money was flowing into these southern states, there ended up being a lot of corruption. So the earlier laws that were on the books that dealt with ethics of businesses were not set up for the kind of growth, the kind of money that was coming into these southern states at this time. And so there was a good amount of public money that was misused to pay for like gambling losses, to pay for prostitutes and things like that. I mean, just rampant corruption. And this actually impacted not just folks in the southern states, but even like the administration of former Union General Ulysses S. Grant. Grant was a two-term president, but his administration itself had a lot of folks that were on the take and highly corrupt. Now, Grant was not personally caught up in any of that. Grant was considered to be quite honest, but the people that Grant had around him were not considered to be very honest. Okay, so we're going to stop there. That's roughly half an hour or so. So I'll have another couple of videos for you to watch after this, but we'll continue on with this tomorrow, and we'll talk about like the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and some topics like that. So I will post on the screen here the reflection question. I hadn't thought about it before I sat down to make this video because I was working very quickly, but I will post it on the screen here as I'm doing this little bit. So I will see everybody tomorrow. Thank you for paying attention.